Welcome, everyone, to this webinar brought to you by the Israel Defense and Security Forum, IDSF. In Hebrew, our name is Bitronistim. IDSF is the leading Israeli organization advocating for strong, strategic, national security-oriented policies. Our movement consists of more than 20,000 people in Israel, including many, many reserve officers and operators from all branches of the Israel Defense Establishment who believe that strong national security and staunch Zionism are necessary for Israel to be the eternal homeland of the Jewish people. Thank you so much to all of our viewers and supporters for tuning into these war briefings. We are joined today by Brigadier General Amir Avivi, founder and chairman of IDSF, as well as Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, an expert on the U.S.-Israel relations, and of course, a member of IDSF. We're going to jump right in. General, please, what can you share us in terms of an update on the war today?
We woke up today to a very, very difficult morning with 10 soldiers that were killed in the fierce fighting in Gaza, most of them in Sajaiya. I spoke this morning with the commander of Division 162 that is operating in the northern part of Gaza in Sajaiya, commanding the Golani Brigade. That fought in 2014 in Sajaiya and are fighting again in this area. This brigade, in the last 4 days, killed more than 450 terrorists in Sajaiya. So overall, the operation, the war in this area is going well and according to the plan, but in the night, the battalion of Golani stormed a position of the battalion of Sajaiya, the terrorist. It's a compound of a few houses and a playground connected to tunnels. And in the first engagement, there was an improvised explosive device and shooting, and some of our soldiers were hurt and killed. And from that moment, the whole fight started with the battalion commanders of Golani running, really engaging in combat to make sure that no soldier is kidnapped. And they managed to kill the terrorists. And in this fighting, 8 of our soldiers, including the commander of the battalion 13 of Golani, were killed. And also a colonel from the brigade headquarters. All the commanders were engaged in this combat. This is how the IDF operates. The commanders are leading the fight, exactly the opposite of what Hamas is doing. The commanders are hiding in tunnels and sitting in luxurious hotels in Doha, in Qatar. We are a very different society. So the division commander expects that in 3-4 days we'll completely conquer Sajaiya and destroy all this battalion there. But the fighting is going on and it's complicated. Givati Brigade in Khan Yunis are moving forward with the tank brigades and doing a good job and destroying many positions of Hamas. So the fighting continues, and everybody is expecting that somewhere in the beginning of January, these most strong positions of Hamas will be in our hands. And then really the question is where this is going from there. Ambassador Ettinger will discuss the whole issue of the American administration and the pressure and everything that's going on. And it's pretty much affecting what will happen in next. And it's very, very important to discuss this and see that we have all the support we need to finish destroying Hamas. In the north, we're continuing to attack Hezbollah positions. Things are pretty much the same and no dramatic change there. Thank you, Moshe.
Thank you, General. So it's a great pleasure to have Ambassador Yoram Ettinger with us. Yesterday in our briefing, we began discussing the U.S.-Israel relationship and how it's potentially changing or impacting this war. So Ambassador Edgener is an expert on this matter. So please, the floor is yours. What can you share with us?
Well, thank you very much. What I would like to do is in a very succinct manner, concise manner, refer to few aspects of U.S. policy in the Middle East and U.S.-Israel relations, starting with the fact that we have currently in Israel a record number of U.S. military people, top military experts. But I would like to emphasize, not in order to help Israel, but mostly in order to conclude very important lessons drawn from the current war as far as benefiting the experience of the U.S. armed forces, preparing them for potential confrontations in the future. This follows in the footsteps of what U.S. benefited from the 1967 war. We're following the war. There was a delegation of U.S. military people. They collected a bunch of lessons. They stayed here for 3 months, collecting lessons about battle tactics of the Israelis, battle tactics of the Soviet-trained Egyptian and Syrian forces, and also information on captured Soviet armed systems that led to much more intense American presence following the 73 war. They stayed here half a year, and they collected very heavy volume of lessons, which has benefited until today, in fact, the U.S. defense industry and the U.S. armed forces. And currently the aim is exactly the same, to observe the Israeli battle tactics, applying it also to the American special operations and other ground forces, as well as the U.S. defense industry, and at the same time learn the battle tactics of terrorists who are also facing Americans in the Persian Gulf, in the Middle East, and as we know, also in the U.S. homeland itself. The other element which I wanted to mention is the implication of the current war on U.S. policy towards Iran. Iran has been the number 1 supplier of military hardware to Hamas and Hezbollah. That supply has been made possible by Iran's earnings of its oil export until January 2021. Iran was under oil exportation sanctions. They could not exceed 500,000 barrels per day of exports. Since January 2021 until today, they have catapulted to anywhere between 2 and 3 million barrels per day. The difference between 500,000 and 2 to 3 million barrels per day has netted the Iranians roughly $100 billion, which they have not dedicated to enhance standard of living, but rather to bolster the anti-American global terrorism, drug trafficking, proliferation of advanced military systems, including providing Hamas and Hezbollah with those advanced military systems, most notably the missiles, which have exerted very severe price here, especially on October 7th and since October 7th. The U.S. policy towards Iran has followed the diplomatic option, which has been basically the policy since February 1979, when the Ayatollahs assumed power. The balance of the last 44 years shows that the diplomatic option has been a bonanza for the anti-American Ayatollahs of Iran and quite a setback to the US itself and to every single ally of the US in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, as well as Israel. It's time, after 44 years, to conduct due diligence and find out about the merit of the diplomatic option and consider other options such as regime change, such as effective military threat hovering above the head of the Ayatollahs. And the last element I would like to mention very, very briefly is what we hear from the President of the US, especially from the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken, who, let's face it, he is the architect of Biden's foreign policy, Biden's national security policy. It is being cooked by Secretary Tony Blinken. And Tony Blinken has been enamored with the concept of a proposed Palestinian state. The interesting thing is that there is a huge gap between Blinken's embrace and eagerness to have a Palestinian state in Judea and Samaria, otherwise known as the West Bank, on the one hand, and every single pro-American Arab country in the Middle East, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, Egypt, Jordan, Morocco, etc., all of them shower the Palestinians with embracing talk, but their walk is anywhere from indifferent to negative. And the difference between the attitude has to do with the US State Department, which has based its attitude towards the idea, the concept of a Palestinian state on future scenarios, which are subjective, which are speculative. They've based it on diplomatic talk, peaceful talk with Palestinian leaders. The Arabs, on the other hand, do not pay much attention to future speculation, subjective scenarios. They don't take seriously the Palestinians' peaceful talk. They pay attention to the Palestinian track record in the inter-Arab sphere. And as far as the Palestinian track record, it's very clear as far as the Arabs are concerned. In the 1950s, in the 1960s, 70s, in 1990, the Palestinians were hosted by Egypt, Syria, Jordan, Lebanon, and Kuwait, and they turned against each host, every single host, with subversion, with terrorism, with bloodshed against their host country. The Arabs do not forget and they do not forgive, and they consider the Palestinians to be role model of intra-Arab subversion, treachery, and ingratitude, and obviously terrorism. And therefore, while they shower the Palestinians with embracing talk, the walk is consistent with the Palestinians' own walk, which means anti-Palestinian state. The Arabs realize a Palestinian state would only add fuel, not water, to the raging Middle East. To use a Texan colloquialism, when the State Department talks about Palestinian state and Israeli state and Jordan all peacefully coexisting with one another, it goes back to what I learned in Texas. Well, they say you can put your boots in the oven, but that don't make them biscuits. Apparently, State Department officials have missed that Texas lesson. It's time for them to pay a few visits to Texas in order to get in touch with the real rather than alternative Middle East. And I would like to end my initial comments here.
Thank you so much. In terms of the U.S. interest. You outlined a number of important points. I don't think I heard you say anything about the US being concerned that the fighting over here could spill over and reach the West. If you take a look at some of the groups like the Houthis, they make it pretty clear that first Israel and then the rest of the West. Do you not think that that is a real concern that the US has, that there's no interest in protecting the US?
Well, excuse me, I'm sorry. I'm sorry. Oh, wow. I apologize. Such a concern should drive the US to bolster its support of Israel, because there is such a threat, and such a threat is nourished by declining Israeli posture of deterrence, by declining US posture of deterrence, and certainly when Israel defeats terrorism, uproot Hamas, hits Hezbollah, that sends a message of bolstered posture of deterrence. October 7 eroded severely Israel's posture of deterrence. What Israel has done since October 7 has aimed at recuperating, restoring Israel's posture of deterrence, which is an Israeli interest as it is an American interest, because a deterring Israel deters terrorism and deters wars. Pressured Israel, deterred Israel, induces more terrorism and more wars, not only against Israel, because the terrorists, rightly so, consider Israel to be the outpost of the West in the Middle East, the role model of countering terrorism. And for Hamas and Hezbollah and their number one engine, or the number one supporter, the Ayatollahs of Iran, defeating the Western outpost in the Middle East, defeating the role model of countering terrorism, would be a major achievement, preparing them for the real goal. And the real goal is to bring Western culture to submission. The real goal is to defeat the great American Satan. And therefore, the observation is absolutely correct. The way they go about it is absolutely wrong. There should be support, and they should be cheering and encouraging Israel to go faster, to press the military pedal to the metal in a more decisive manner, rather than what we hear today. Talk with the Palestinians, reason with the Palestinians, don't pressure Hamas too harshly. You have only few weeks to go, and then you may lose our support. Those messages provide tailwind to the Ayatollahs, tailwind to Hamas, tailwind to Hezbollah, and a major headwind to America and its own interest in the Middle East and beyond.
We keep hearing, of course, about civilian casualty. And when the pressure is building from the US, there's this constant theme of stopping civilian casualty, minimizing civilian casualty in Gaza. The question is that really what this is about? Or is civilian casualty just a nice slogan, so to speak, to push other agendas that the US has, that the administration or the State Department has? I mean, do they really care about civilian casualty?
Well, the reference to civilian casualties is synonymous with the reference to supposed, and I underline supposed, division between Hamas on the one hand and Palestinians on the other hand. We have to wake up to reality. Hamas is not a Peruvian shining star terror organization which is imposing itself on the Peruvian society. Hamas is not the Red Brigade of Italy, which was a renegade rogue element in Italy, contrary to the Italian population. Hamas in Gaza is part and parcel of the overall population. Hamas in Gaza represents the sentiments of the vast majority of Palestinians, both in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria. Hamas conduct, in fact, reflects most authentically the school curriculum, which was established by Mahmoud Abbas of the Palestinian Authority, K through 12, urging Palestinian kids to become martyrs for the cause, to slay Jews, to destroy the Zionist entity, and actually to commit all those horrific acts which we experienced on October 7th. And therefore, when the president of the US urges Israel to separate the Hamas terrorists from the Palestinian population, the president reflects the oversimplified views of this conflict as typifies the Secretary of State, Tony Blinken. Palestinian mothers in Gaza Strip were proud to send their children to schools run by Hamas, to mosques run by Hamas. They cheered October 7th so-called parade of Israeli hostages. We are talking about almost 2 generations of Palestinians in Gaza and Judea and Samaria brainwashed by such education. It probably will take, if we have the right conditions, 1 or 2 generations to uproot that very, very horrific state of mind. But one should not resort to the highly simplistic and self-destructive assumption that there is a difference between Hamas and so-called innocent Palestinian population in Gaza. That belongs to the alternative reality of the State Department, which wishes to create a Middle East which is more amenable to solutions, unlike the current Middle East, which is frustrating, which is bloody, which is unpredictable. But sadly, that's the reality which we have to contend with.
Thank you again to all of our viewers for sending in your questions. I'm trying to get to as many as we can. In terms of the two-state solution and the PA running Gaza, it would seem to be a lot of polls show that a majority of Israelis and a majority of Arabs, and as you said, many Arab countries in the Middle East all think this is not going to work. What does it take to convey that message to the administration and to the State Department to get them out of this fixation on a two-state solution and the PA in Gaza?
Well, it seems to me that the way to go about it is by highlighting the impact of the proposed Palestinian state upon America's interest. Arab leaders oppose Palestinian state because they are aware a Palestinian state west of the Jordan River would doom the pro-American Hashemite regime east of the river. It would transform Jordan into a chaotic state with litany of terror organizations fighting one against the other. The Muslim Brotherhood, Palestinian terrorists, Iran-controlled terrorists, ISIS terrorists, Syrian-controlled terrorists, Iraqi-controlled terrorists, and this would become a platform for anti-American regional and global Islamic terrorism, just like Libya and Lebanon and Syria and Iraq and Yemen. But it will not be limited only to Jordan, because once you have a chaotic state of affairs in Jordan, the question is how many days or how many weeks before it starts creating ripple effects, a domino scenario into the Arabian Peninsula south of Jordan, which would threaten every single pro-American oil-producing Arab regime, Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Bahrain, as well as Oman and Egypt and Jordan, it would be a bonanza to Iran's Ayatollah, to China, to Russia, and quite a setback, not only to global trade, not only to the price of oil and this exportation of oil from the Persian Gulf, but it will be quite a blow to American economy and homeland security and national security. The fact that the State Department is so eager to establish a Palestinian state means that they do not deal with such a realistic scenario as viewed by every single pro-American Arab regime. They assume that the future scenario will present to us peaceful coexistence between a Palestinian state and Israel and the Hashemite regime in Jordan. And that means, again, they have not spent much time in the Southwest or in Texas. In Texas, they say, don't kiss chicken before they grow lips. Last time I observed the Palestinian chicken, none of them has grown lips. And therefore, we should approach the Palestinian issue and the proposed Palestinian state against that realistic reality. Namely, we don't have yet Palestinians with lips. It's premature to kiss them.
Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, thank you so much for all of this, for the deep dive into the U.S.-Israel relationship and the two new slogans we've all learned out of Texas. We're going to go to Brigadier General Amir Avivi for some final thoughts for the day.
Yes, we have 1 minute, and I want to share with you that yesterday in this fight in Sajaya, Major Ben Shelley, kid, not such a kid, he's 28 years old, but I've known him since he was a little kid. He's the son of Moshe Shelley, Brigadier General, retired, member of the IDSF, former Corps Commander of the Combat Engineers, and I was twice his deputy. I was his deputy as battalion commander in Battalion 605, and later on I was the deputy of Shelley when he was the commander of the Corps, and I was the deputy. Shelley joined 2 years ago IDSF, and last night he lost his eldest son, Ben, which I've known for many years, and of course also his wife. And tomorrow we're going to the graveyard, and this is the reality. This is the reality we're facing, and while we're grieving our dead and assisting all the injured, and we have more than 1,500 soldiers that were injured in combat, some of them pretty bad. We must be strong and resolute and win decisively this war. And we are going to push and do everything needed to strengthen the cabinet and the army to achieve its goals.
Amen. Brigadier General Amir Avivi, Ambassador Yoram Ettinger, all of our viewers and supporters, thank you so much for tuning in. Wishing everyone a happy Hanukkah. We are not going to have a briefing tomorrow. We will pick up again 10 a.m. Monday Eastern Time. Wishing everyone a happy Hanukkah. Stay safe and stay strong. Take care.